Millionaire hires a fake wife to deceive his sick grandfather. Will it work? Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin our story. In the bustling city of New York, where dreams are made and secrets are kept, Lucas Stone was at a crossroads in his life. At 35, he had built an empire worth millions, but his success had come at a price: loneliness. He had no real friends, no true connections. The only person who had ever cared for him was his grandfather, Robert Stone, a frail and aging man who had raised him after his parents' untimely death. But now, Robert was on his deathbed, and his only wish was to see Lucas married. To keep his grandfather's fading spirits up, Lucas had promised to marry before Robert passed away. However, there was one problem. Lucas was not ready for marriage, and he certainly did not want to marry for the wrong reasons. That's when he came up with a plan. He needed a woman, someone who would pretend to be his wife for just a few months, someone who would play the role convincingly enough to fool his grandfather. That was when he found Emma, a struggling actress living in Brooklyn. Lucas had met her by chance, in a coffee shop where she worked part-time, trying to make ends meet. Her life was a far cry from the glittering world Lucas inhabited, but there was something about her, something real and unpolished, that caught his eye. He approached her with an offer she couldn't refuse, a large sum of money in exchange for playing the role of his wife. Emma was hesitant, but desperate for money to pay her rent and care for her ailing mother. She reluctantly agreed. The contract was simple: act like his wife for 3 months, attend family gatherings, smile for the cameras, and most importantly, keep his grandfather happy. But what started as a business arrangement quickly became complicated. As they spent more time together, Lucas couldn't help but notice how Emma's genuine warmth and kindness began to chip away at his cold exterior. Emma, too, began to see beyond Lucas's wealth and power. She saw a man who was trapped by his own success, a man who had never known true love, and who, despite everything, just wanted to be seen for who he really was. Yet, neither of them was ready for the unexpected emotions that would soon develop. Will Lucas's plan succeed? Or will he find himself caught up in the very thing he was trying to avoid? Stay tuned for the next part of the story. As the days went by, Lucas and Emma began to settle into their new arrangement. The facade of a perfect marriage was becoming more natural, or at least, that's how it appeared. Emma was learning the ropes of being a wife to a millionaire, attending charity events, gala dinners, and posing for photos with Lucas at his side. Each time she walked into a room, the flashing lights of the paparazzi made her feel like a completely different person. But it was all part of the plan. At least that's what she told herself. She kept reminding herself that she was here for the money, that she needed this job to pay for her mother's medical bills. Yet, deep down, she couldn't help but notice the little moments of vulnerability Lucas showed her. The way he smiled when he thought no one was looking, the slight hesitation in his voice when he spoke about his past, the way his eyes softened when they were alone. He was not the cold-hearted businessman she had imagined. One evening, after a long day filled with events, Lucas took Emma to a quiet corner of his penthouse, away from the prying eyes of their world. He poured them both a glass of wine, the deep red liquid matching the warmth in the room. They sat in silence for a moment, just the two of them, surrounded by the soft glow of the city lights outside. Emma's mind wandered, and she couldn't help but wonder about the man behind the suit. He was always so composed, so controlled. But was that just an act? Did he ever feel the loneliness she saw in his eyes? She hadn't expected to feel a connection to him, but there it was, stirring beneath the surface. Lucas, too, was finding himself struggling with the situation. He had hired Emma to pretend to be his wife, but the more time he spent with her, the more he began to feel something he hadn't expected, something real. She wasn't just a placeholder. She was kind, genuine, and despite her tough exterior, there was a softness to her that touched him in ways he couldn't explain. One night, as they sat together, Lucas finally broke the silence. "You know," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I never thought I'd actually be comfortable with this. With you." Emma looked up at him, surprised by the honesty in his words. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas took a deep breath, setting his glass down. I hired you to play a role, but I think I'm starting to like the person you are. Not just the wife I need to present to my grandfather, but you, Emma. The words hung in the air between them, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure how to respond. Was this part of the game? Was he just playing with her emotions to make her feel like this was real? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something different. This wasn't the cold, calculating man she had first met. He was letting down his guard, and in that moment, she realized that maybe she had let down hers too. They had crossed a line, and neither of them knew how to go back. I'm not what you think I am, Emma said softly, unsure of where this was leading. I never expected any of this to happen, but she trailed off, not knowing how to put her feelings into words. I know, Lucas replied, his voice low. Neither did I. The tension in the room was palpable, and for the first time since their arrangement began, they both felt the weight of what was happening between them. What had started as a contract, a simple business deal to appease a dying man, was beginning to feel like something more. Something neither of them could control. But with the clock ticking down to his grandfather's final days, could they ignore the feelings that were beginning to blossom between them? Or would their fake marriage fall apart before they had the chance to figure it out? The days that followed were filled with tension and anticipation. Lucas could feel the pull between him and Emma, growing stronger with each passing moment. What had started as a simple arrangement to please his grandfather had morphed into something far more complicated. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, wondering if the smile she gave him was genuine or if it was all part of the act. But then again, wasn't he doing the same thing? He had hired her to pretend, so why was it so hard to keep his emotions in check? The truth was, he was falling for her, and that terrified him. He had never allowed himself to be vulnerable, not even in the face of his grandfather's illness. Yet, Emma had broken through that wall, and now he wasn't sure how to stop the feelings that were bubbling up inside him. Emma, on the other hand, was struggling with her own emotions. At first, she had convinced herself that this was just a job, just a way to make some quick money to help her mother. She had no intention of getting emotionally involved with Lucas Stone, but now it was impossible to ignore the connection they shared. She saw how kind he could be when no one was watching, how he cared for his grandfather in ways that were so personal, so tender. The more she got to know him, the more she realized that there was much more to him than the cold, calculating businessman she had first met. But just as she was beginning to open her heart, she remembered why she was really there. This wasn't a fairy tale. She wasn't his real wife. This was all a lie, and no matter how much she cared about him, she couldn't forget that. One evening, they found themselves alone in the living room, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging in the air between them. Lucas was sitting on the couch, his hand resting on the armrest, and Emma was standing by the window, gazing out at the city skyline. The soft glow of the lights below illuminated her face, and for a moment, everything felt still. Emma, Lucas said softly, breaking the silence. I need to know something. She turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. What is it? Are we still pretending? His voice was barely above a whisper, and Emma could hear the vulnerability in his words. I mean, is this still just a contract for you, or is it something more? The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Emma didn't know how to respond. Her mind was racing, torn between the feelings she had for him and the reality of their situation. I don't know, she finally admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I never expected any of this. I never thought I'd fall for you. Lucas stood up and walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. I never thought I'd fall for you either, he said, his eyes searching hers. But I have. I can't keep pretending this is just a game. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a rush of emotions she hadn't been prepared for. She had told herself she wouldn't get involved, but now that he had said it out loud, she realized that she couldn't deny it any longer. But we can't be together, she said softly, the weight of her words heavy in the room. This was supposed to be a lie, and when your grandfather is gone, I'll be gone too. Lucas reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. Maybe we don't have to wait for that to happen, he said, his voice firm yet tender. Maybe we can make our own story. Emma looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their fake marriage could become something real. But as they stood there, With the city lights flickering outside and the weight of their feelings pressing against them, both knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still lies to untangle, and the truth about their relationship would eventually come to light. But for now, in that moment, they were simply two people trying to figure out how to love each other, despite the mess they had created. The days following that conversation between Lucas and Emma were filled with uncertainty. They had both admitted their feelings for each other, but the weight of the situation still loomed over them. Lucas's grandfather, Robert, was growing weaker by the day, and Emma couldn't shake the thought that everything was just a temporary arrangement. She had never intended for this to happen, but now she was beginning to question what would happen once the charade ended. Lucas, too, found himself torn. He had always prided himself on being in control, but now, the situation with Emma was something he couldn't plan or control. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized how much he wanted this to be real. But he also knew that there were things they hadn't discussed, things that, if revealed, could shatter everything they had built together. One evening, Lucas and Emma sat down for dinner in the grand dining room of his penthouse. The city lights twinkled outside, casting a soft glow across the table. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, just the two of them, sharing a meal. But as soon as they sat down, the air felt thick with tension. Neither of them knew where to start. After a long silence, Lucas set his fork down and looked at Emma. "We need to talk," he said, his voice serious. Emma met his gaze, feeling her heart race. "About what?" she asked, unsure of what he was about to say. "About us," Lucas replied. "What happens when my grandfather is gone? What happens to us?" The question hung in the air, and Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had been avoiding this conversation, but now it seemed unavoidable. "I don't know," she said quietly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't plan for any of this. I came here to help you, to play a part. But now, I don't know what's real anymore." Lucas reached across the table, his hand gently resting on hers. "I know," he said softly. "I didn't expect to feel this way either. But the more I'm with you, the more I want this to be real." Emma looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "But how can we make this real? Everything about this was fake to begin with." Lucas squeezed her hand, his voice firm yet tender. "Maybe it was fake at first, but we can't ignore what we feel now. We don't have to wait for my grandfather to pass to make this real. We can start fresh, together, and figure it out as we go." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Emma just stared at him, unsure of what to say. Could they really do this? Could they really turn a contract into something real? As the minutes passed, the tension in the room began to ease. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Maybe they could make it work. Maybe they could turn this fake marriage into something more. But then, as if on cue, the phone rang, interrupting their moment. Lucas picked it up, his face going serious as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Yes, I understand," he said before hanging up. He looked at Emma with a pained expression. "That was the doctor. My grandfather. He's not doing well. The doctors say it's only a matter of time." Emma's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment, but she hadn't expected it to come so soon. She stood up, walking over to Lucas's side. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. Lucas stood as well, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, though his voice held uncertainty. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, both uncertain of what the future would hold. But one thing was clear. No matter what happened, they had started something real, something neither of them could deny. And as the clock ticked on, they both knew that they couldn't go back. Their lives were changing, and together, they would face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with a mix of grief and uncertainty. Lucas's grandfather, Robert, had taken a sudden turn for the worse, and it seemed that his time was running out. Emma, though she had never expected to form such a deep connection with Lucas, found herself by his side in ways she hadn't anticipated. They had begun this arrangement as strangers, but now, as the days grew darker, their bond was becoming undeniable. Emma spent her time with Robert, sitting with him, listening to him reminisce about the past, while Lucas was often in meetings or dealing with business affairs. The weight of the situation pressed down on them both. Emma had tried to keep her emotions in check, but the vulnerability of the moment made it impossible to ignore how much she had come to care for Lucas. She saw how he struggled to keep it together for the sake of his grandfather. He tried to maintain his composed, businesslike demeanor, but there were moments when his guard slipped, and she saw the pain beneath it all. One evening, as the sun set, casting an orange glow across the room, Lucas and Emma sat together in silence. His grandfather had taken a nap, and they had a brief moment to themselves. Lucas looked at Emma, his face tired and worn, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes. "You know," he began, his voice low, "I never thought I'd be here, doing this. I never imagined I'd be so vulnerable." Emma turned to him, her heart aching. "You're allowed to be vulnerable, Lucas. You're human." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's hard, though. I've spent my whole life building this empire, thinking that I could control everything, but I never learned how to feel. Not like this." Emma reached out, placing her hand over his. "You've done so much for your grandfather. That's love, Lucas. It's okay to let yourself feel it." He looked at her, his gaze softening. "I don't know how to make sense of it all. I'm not the same person I was when we first started this whole thing." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "None of us are. But that's okay. We change, we grow." Lucas looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want this to be over, Emma. I don't want to lose you when it's all said and done." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying to protect herself from getting too attached, but in this moment, she realized she was already in too deep. She cared for him in ways she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. "I don't want it to be over either," she said softly. The truth hung between them, fragile and tender. But just as they were beginning to reach for something more, the phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the quiet room. Lucas's face hardened as he picked it up. "Yes?" he answered, his tone changing immediately. It was the doctor. "We'll be right there," Lucas said, hanging up the phone. He turned to Emma, his expression unreadable. "It's time." Emma stood up, feeling the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She followed Lucas as they made their way to his grandfather's room, knowing that their time together was rapidly running out. Robert was fading, and Lucas's world was about to change forever. As they entered the room, Emma could see the struggle in Lucas's eyes. He had always been so strong, so composed, but now, in the face of loss, he was finally letting go. The grief that had been building for so long was beginning to spill over. Emma stayed by his side, offering the quiet support that only someone who had come to care deeply could give. In that moment, she realized that what had started as a lie, a simple arrangement to appease a dying man, had turned into something far more significant. She was no longer just a hired wife. She was someone Lucas could lean on, someone he could share his pain with. As Robert took his last breath, Emma held Lucas's hand tightly, knowing that they were both standing on the precipice of something new, something real. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, all that mattered was the connection they had forged and the love that had quietly blossomed between them. The days following Robert's passing were filled with a mix of grief and reflection. Lucas, though still processing the loss of the one person who had meant the world to him, found himself turning to Emma more and more. She had been there for him through it all, comforting him when he needed it most, offering silent support as he faced the final moments with his grandfather. But even as he felt the weight of the loss, he could not deny the growing feelings he had for her. He had come to realize that his initial plan had never been just about his grandfather's wishes or his business. It had been about Emma. It had always been about her. Emma, too, was struggling. The connection between her and Lucas had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. What started as a simple contract to play the part of a wife had turned into something real. But now, with Robert gone, she was uncertain about their future. What was this relationship really? She wasn't just a hired woman anymore. She had become a part of his life, a part of his world, and now that Robert was no longer there, the arrangement felt fragile, like something built on a shifting foundation. Lucas sat in his study, staring out at the skyline, lost in thought. The city below seemed to hum with life, but he felt disconnected from it all. He had never allowed himself to fully open up to anyone, not since the loss of his parents. But with Emma, something had changed. She had become his anchor, the one person he could rely on when everything else seemed to be falling apart. As the weeks went on, Lucas found himself questioning everything. He didn't want to let go of Emma, but how could he ask her to stay when their marriage had never been real to begin with? One evening, As they sat together in the living room, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Emma had been quiet all evening, her eyes distant as she looked at him. Lucas knew something was on her mind, but he wasn't sure how to ask. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Emma spoke. "Lucas, what happens now? I mean, after everything that's happened." Lucas's heart clenched as he looked at her. He had been dreading this moment, knowing that they couldn't avoid the truth any longer. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "You lost your grandfather," she said softly, "and I don't know where that leaves us. Was this all just a lie? Am I just supposed to walk away when it's over?" Lucas stood up and walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the couch. He took her hand in his grip firm yet gentle. "No," he said, his voice low but steady. "This was never just a lie. I don't want it to be." Emma looked at him, her eyes searching his. "But how can we move forward, Lucas? What happens after all this?" Lucas's heart raced as he looked at her, the weight of the question pressing down on him. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, his voice quiet. "But I know I don't want to let you go. I can't go back to the way things were." Emma felt her heart swell as she looked at him. In that moment, she realized that everything had changed. She had never expected to fall for him, but now, she couldn't imagine a life without him. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with a sense of determination. "We take it one step at a time. We figure this out together." And for the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their love could be real. The road ahead was uncertain, but in that moment, as they sat together, they both knew they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The weeks after their conversation were filled with a sense of anticipation and quiet tension. Lucas and Emma had made the decision to give their relationship a real chance, but it was far from simple. The weight of their past, the contract, the fake marriage, still loomed over them, and though they both wanted more, they were unsure how to move forward. Lucas threw himself into his work, as if to distract himself from the emotions that had begun to bubble to the surface. He was trying to control everything around him, as he always had, but this time, he couldn't. He couldn't control his feelings for Emma. Emma, on the other hand, had begun to see their relationship in a new light. She had always been careful with her heart, never letting anyone in for fear of getting hurt. But with Lucas, everything was different. She couldn't help but want to believe in the possibility of something real. Still, she struggled with the fear that once the charade was over, so would their connection. She had no place in his world, and she wasn't sure she belonged there. One evening, Lucas invited Emma to dinner at one of his favorite restaurants, a quiet, intimate place where they could relax, away from the world they had been navigating. They sat at a corner table, the soft glow of candlelight casting shadows on their faces. For a moment, everything felt normal. They were just two people, sharing a meal, without the weight of the contract hanging over them. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "About how much I want this to be real." Emma looked up at him, her heart racing. "I want that too," she admitted. "But what happens when the world finds out? What happens when they know this wasn't real at first?" Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "We make it real. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. We're in this together, Emma. I want you in my life, not just as someone I pretend to be married to." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. She had never imagined hearing those words from him, and yet here they were, on the verge of something that could change everything. "But what about your family? The business?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They won't understand." Lucas smiled softly, his thumb brushing over her hand. "Let them think what they want. What matters is that I'm choosing you." Emma swallowed hard, her eyes welling with emotion. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that this might all fall apart." Lucas stood up and walked around the table to her side. He knelt beside her, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of tenderness and determination. "I'm scared too," he said, his voice low. "But I know that I don't want to live without you. We'll figure it out, no matter what happens." They sat there for a long time, neither of them saying anything, but both of them feeling the weight of their decisions settle into place. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, Emma knew one thing for sure. She was ready to take a leap of faith with Lucas. As they left the restaurant that night, hand in hand, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change forever. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. The world might not understand their love, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had each other. And that was enough. As the weeks passed, the weight of their decision continued to linger between them. Lucas and Emma had committed to being honest with each other, to make this real, but the outside world had yet to see the truth. Lucas's family, particularly his mother and sister, remained unaware of the depth of their relationship. They still believed that Lucas was simply fulfilling his grandfather's wish by marrying a woman who had agreed to play the role of his wife for the time being. But the act was no longer an act. The love that had grown between them couldn't be denied. Lucas knew that the longer they kept up the charade, the harder it would be to come clean. But Emma was struggling with her place in his world. She had grown close to Lucas, but she still felt like an outsider in his family's world. She couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the truth came out. Would they accept her as Lucas's true partner, or would they see her as nothing more than a temporary solution? One evening, after another long day of work, Lucas came home to find Emma sitting in the living room, her eyes downcast. He could tell something was weighing on her. "Hey," he said softly, walking over to where she sat. "What's going on?" Emma looked up at him, her expression conflicted. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About us. About everything." Lucas knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "What's bothering you?" he asked, his concern clear. "I know we've made this decision to make it real," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm not sure how to face your family. How can I be a part of that world when I'm just pretending to be someone I'm not? When we're still hiding the truth?" Lucas took a deep breath, then gently cupped her face in his hands. "Emma, you are part of my world now, and I don't want to hide us anymore. We're not pretending. Not anymore. I'm ready to tell my family the truth, no matter how hard it might be." Emma's eyes widened with surprise. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "What if they don't understand? What if they think we're making a mistake?" Lucas smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "I'm sure," he said, "and I don't care what they think. This is our life, Emma, and it's time we stop living it in the shadows." The words felt like a weight lifting off her chest. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to believe in their future, one where they didn't have to hide, one where they could finally be honest with the people who mattered most. That night, Lucas made the decision. The following weekend, they would host a dinner at his family's estate, where he would finally tell his mother and sister the truth. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever came next. As the evening approached, Emma felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She knew that the dinner would be a turning point for both her and Lucas. It was a chance for them to step into the light, to stop hiding from the people who mattered. As they prepared for the dinner, Lucas held her close, offering the quiet reassurance she needed. "No matter what happens, we're in this together," he whispered, his arms around her. Emma nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never felt more certain of their love. The night of the dinner, Lucas and Emma arrived at his family's home, their hearts racing with anticipation. The familiar grandeur of the estate felt different now, less like a place she didn't belong and more like a home she was ready to embrace. As they walked into the dining room, Lucas's mother and sister looked up, their faces a mixture of curiosity and expectation. Lucas took a deep breath, then turned to Emma, his hand holding hers tightly. "It's time," he said softly. Emma nodded, knowing that this was the moment that would change everything. Together, they walked into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next, together. The dinner was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Lucas had told Emma everything would be okay, but now, standing in front of his family, Emma felt the weight of their expectations bearing down on her. His mother, Caroline, sat at the head of the table, her eyes sharp and calculating, while his younger sister, Lily, watched the two of them with curiosity. Lucas squeezed Emma's hand under the table, giving her a small smile, as if to reassure her. "Mom, Lily, there's something important we need to talk about," Lucas began, his voice steady. Caroline raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not yet fully on guard. "What is it, Lucas?" she asked, her tone neutral but laced with an undercurrent of suspicion. Lucas took a deep breath before turning to Emma. "This is Emma," he said, his voice firm. "She's not just someone I've been pretending to be married to. She's the woman I love. The words hit the table like a stone dropped into a pond, ripples of surprise spreading across the room. Caroline's face tightened, and Lily looked between them, clearly confused. "What do you mean, love?" Caroline asked, her voice suddenly colder. "I thought you were just going through with this because of your grandfather's wishes. You didn't say anything about feelings." Lucas turned to Emma, his eyes softening. "I didn't expect to fall in love with her, Mom. I didn't plan for it, but it's real." Emma held her breath, unsure of how Caroline would react. The woman had always been reserved, and Emma had never quite felt like she fit into Lucas's world. But now, she was ready to stand up for what she and Lucas had. Caroline stared at them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, she put her fork down and looked directly at Emma. "I have to admit, this is a shock," she said, her voice low but not unkind. "But if Lucas believes this is real, I can't just dismiss it. You've clearly meant something to him these past few months." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that simple? Caroline wasn't angry. She wasn't dismissing them. Lily, on the other hand, had been quiet until now. "So, this whole thing wasn't just some business arrangement?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. "No," Lucas said, shaking his head. "This is real. Emma is real." There was a long silence as the family absorbed this new reality. Emma's hands trembled slightly, and Lucas gave her a reassuring squeeze. Finally, Caroline stood up, her decision made. "Well then, if you truly believe in this, Lucas, I'll support you. It's your life, after all." Lucas's eyes softened as he stood and walked over to his mother. "Thank you, Mom." The tension that had filled the room began to dissipate as Lucas embraced his mother, a moment of connection finally forged between them. Emma watched the scene, feeling the weight lift off her chest. The love between Lucas and his family was complicated, but they were all trying to move forward, to make room for the truth, for something real. As the evening continued, Emma and Lucas shared a quiet moment together, sitting outside on the balcony, the cool night air wrapping around them. "That went better than I expected," Emma said, smiling at him. Lucas grinned back, his hand finding hers. "I knew it would work out," he said, his voice soft. "It's just the beginning, Emma. We're not perfect, but we're going to make this work." Emma leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "I believe in us," she whispered. And in that moment, both of them knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they had each other. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, they felt like they could face it together, fully, without fear. Their love had grown from a lie, but now, it was real. And with each other, they were ready to build a future, together.